Thank you all so much for coming today. It's great to see so many new faces here for Clinical Continuum. Welcome. Just a little, we're going to get started here in just a minute. So just so for those of you who are new will know, we offer Clinical Continuum every other month. We offer a lunch with it, as you can see. If you have dietary restrictions, make sure you let Shelly know and she'll order you as such. We also record every Clinical Continuum. So if you're not here and you would like to see it, just let your supervisor know. Jean always keeps a bunch of videos. One goes to Northside, one goes to DeSoto. We'll make sure to get one to Rachel down for Lee people. And if you're not here, we'll make sure you get to see it as well. All right. I have changed the sign-in sheet for those of you who now have, or anyone who has Florida Certification Board certifications. On the sign-in sheet, you'll see there's a new column that says certificate, yes or no. If you need a certificate of attendance for being here today, make sure you click yes, and we will make sure that we give you a copy. Now, I will tell you, we are not going to be maintaining these copies for you. So as a part of your certification, you'll have to be maintaining your own copies of your certificates. So make sure you do that, all right? So now, without further ado, we have asked David Duresky, and if you have been around the agency for the past 5 years, then you know he has come multiple times to talk about motivational interviewing, but he hasn't been here since 2012, I believe it was, or 2000.
Yeah, that's about right.
So we've asked him to come back and do a presentation for us. One thing, because we are going to record, so I asked, any of you who have and are planning on eating your chips, I would love for you to do that. I'm going to ask you to open them now and pour them into your container, because if not, all we hear is a bunch of crinkling, and it makes it a little bit difficult to hear. So, after they get all their chips open, okay, get started.
All right, thank you, Jennifer.
If you want the air conditioner turned really low, I know we have a packed house today, so I am going to try to leave at least one of the doors open, but if it gets too loud out there, I'll close it, just to keep the airflow going for everyone. All right? There's a couple of seats up front if anybody who needs one, so. All righty, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I don't know if it's social media, if it's whatever, 24-hour news cycles, but sometimes it's really easy to get discouraged in the world today, because so much of what we hear is not always positive. But as I was just kind of sitting here, I look at you guys and I think there's a lot of people really committed to making a difference, to working hard, and no, none of us are getting rich. This is what I've pretty much done for most of my adult life. But I just want to let you know I appreciate it. It encourages me, especially as I get older. It encourages me to see how many people are still willing to work hard. Again, and it's not Charlotte Behavioral Healthcare, but it's just our system doesn't always pay us really well for what we do. So I wanted to thank you for that. I date, which is really weird when you're young, but when you're in your 60s, it's even weirder, right? And so I had met someone, and I actually had known her for a long period, not a long period, like 4 or 5 years. And then I asked her out. We went out a couple times, and it was Easter. And she had some family and friends over. I'd spent really a big part of the day with my daughter. And on the way home, I stopped by, and she said, I live in this really unusual condominium, and there's 2 locked doors and a locked gate before you even get to the locked door on my condo. So instead of you trying to figure all that out, why don't I just meet you downstairs? Call me when you get here. So I did. She came down, and we said hi. And she went on in kind of from the side entrance, and we're walking through the parking lot and where their cars are, and as we get 20, 30 feet away, she goes, I have a bike. And I was like, oh, that's nice. She goes, it's right there. She goes, it's the purple one. And then I said, oh, it's a nice bike. And she goes, I check on it every day, because sometimes people park their bikes and they knock it over. I'm worried about someone stealing it even though it's locked up. And then she said, and it's probably time for me to get some maintenance done on it. And I said, well, how often do you ride your bike? And she said, I've never ridden that bike. And I said, well, why do you have a bike? And she said, oh, I'll probably ride it someday, but I take really good care of it. And now this is that weird part about dating at 63, right? Now I'm starting to think, all right, this is like, and then she says, in fact, there's a bike rack at the farther end of the parking lot with fewer bikes. I'm thinking of moving it there, because maybe it wouldn't get hit as much or other bikes falling on it. And in my head I'm thinking, she has a bike, she's had it for 2 years. She looks at it every day. She says, every single day I make sure it's there and it's standing up in the bike rack. And then I started thinking about that, and she really has no intention that I could elicit from her that she's ever going to actually ride the bike. That describes some of the people we get to work with, right? There is something there, and maybe someday they'll do it, but they really don't have a plan to do it. They just it's kind of hanging out there maybe in the future. Motivational interviewing has come a long way since I was exposed to it in the 90s, and it's really now become the model that is kind of taking over a lot of different fields. So here's an interesting thing as well. I got a new phone 2 weeks ago. My phone, I had it for 3 years, the old phone. It was a Samsung S5, right? It was getting ancient. So I got a new phone, and I think it was $800 for a Samsung S8 Plus, right? And this is what I thought about. My mother had the 2 phones that I can recall in her entire life. And she only got the second phone because they told her the dial-up stuff wouldn't work anymore, right? You got to get a push-button phone. She wasn't happy about that. But what I'm saying is there's a lot of really new stuff that we can do that's based on evidence, based on research, based on what works for specific populations. And it's kind of comparing the old to the new. Now, when I started working in the field, I worked in the private for-profit psychiatric hospitals that were really popular in the 80s, and they all came to a crashing halt in the early 90s with managed care. I don't know if any of you did that. So I closed down 3 of those hospitals in a year. I mean, every one time I went to work for it was like, oh no, we're going to stay open, and 3 months later they closed. And maybe for the better when I look back at it, because they were really keeping people for a very long time. And I'm not sure it was a good use of our insurance dollars. So I went to the Village in Miami. So remember, I had also worked at the private for-profit drug and alcohol treatment centers that charge $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a month as well. So the Village was my first entrance into the not-for-profit world. And I was really impressed. Anybody been to the Village in Miami, a large treatment center? I mean, it's like this, nice campuses. I drove to the back thinking that's where this building was. I mean, we do a good job. But they had me run the treatment center for men and women. Residential is 120 beds. And it was a very old school model of working with people. And they brought me in because they could never get the retention rates over 17%. And this is now the time with contracts. And I'm blanking out, what was that old model used where Daytop, not a chart, what was this? Anybody remember what these were called? So substance abuse treatment, really popular in the 60s and 70s. I'm sorry?
Therapeutic community?
Thank you. Therapeutic community. So I went from that, which was people screaming and yelling, literally shaving your heads, putting you in a diaper. And I'm not saying I never swore in my life, but after a year there, my language, the staff swore at the staff, the patients swore at the staff, the administrator swore at everybody. It was just kind of this really unusual thing. So we transitioned out, and what I'm just saying is motivational interviewing and I'm not a young person, right? Reflects what's happened in our industry as we've moved from doing kind of what we feel like doing to some modern things that actually work quite a bit better. It's huge out there right now. The biggest explosion in motivational interviewing right now is not in our field, it's in the medical field. It's in doctors, nurses, healthcare aides, people working in that kind of profession. And I understand there's no one from Healthy Start here, right? Healthy Start requires this as a statewide training, and they do healthcare education for at-risk pregnant women and at-risk infants. But there's over 200 randomized clinical trials behind it. That's your gold standard. That's the control group, the treatment group, published, peer-reviewed. This is not just we did stuff and wrote it on the back of a napkin. And no other model comes close to that, including cognitive behavioral therapy, which I'm a big fan of. So it's there, and it's really come out in a strong way. Some of the changes about it, when I started doing it, though, is learnable. When I got trained in motivational interviewing, you had to have a master's degree with a minimum of 5 years clinical experience just to be trained in it. And now we're training people. In fact, I have one of the best trainers in the Fort Lauderdale area, the gentleman I had the opportunity to train. He doesn't even have a GED. And he's one of the best trainers in it that I have ever seen. And he practices it extremely well. He runs the support staff. They call them RTCs, residential treatment counselors. These, again, usually non-degreed or maybe a little bit of education that work with the homeless population there. So it's learnable by a lot of people, but as I said earlier, one of the profound things is it seems to work with lots of populations. And they're, like I said, it's profound what it's being used to do with today, that it started off just only working with alcoholics. Looking at the other way. So I've always been obsessed with change. Why do people change? What makes a person ride that bicycle instead of just looking at it every day? What is it that why do people stop using drugs and alcohol? Why do psychiatric patients make a decision, I'm going to take my medication? Why do court-ordered DUI people say, all right, I'll go to those stupid groups? Why do parents make a decision to say, if we don't make this change, we're going to lose our children? What is it? Why do healthcare patients, why do people diet? Why do people exercise? Why do they do what we do? So I've been fascinated by that. But I will tell you, and I used to have all of these slides and graphs and all this research stuff, and I found I was more interested in it than most people in the audience. But if you're one of those people that wants to see that, I'll send you all those slides, right? But it used to be like, you see this graph and you see this chart and kind of thing. But what all the research indicates is this. What is the biggest predictor that someone you're working with will make a change? It's your style of working with them. It's not your education. I value education. It's not whether you're certified or licensed, and I value those things. It's not your gender. And it's just funny. Has anybody ever worked in a residential men's program? Okay. Did they allow women to work in that program?
They did.
Has anybody ever worked in a woman's residential program? Do they allow men to work there? Yeah. The ones I were at did. I thought that was always kind of weird. They thought there was some gender-specific thing. I did groups for domestic violence for 4.5 years in Miami for men that had been convicted of battering. And I was told men should never lead those groups because I would absolutely collude with the men. There's just nothing that was going to prevent me from taking their side. Well, I found that wasn't true. But it's not your gender, it's not your race, it's not your ethnicity, it's not how long you've been doing this, it's not all of those things that we put on a resume. The biggest predictor of change for the people you work with is your style of working with them. And so what MI did was codify that style, make it learnable, make it observable, and I will say this, the research in the last 10 years has even more supported what I have said just now. It's really about our relationship with the person. And I know what wrestling is like, where you're always trying to convince people what to do. Don't you want to do this? If you do this, you won't go back to jail. Don't you want to do this? If you do this, you won't lose your children. Don't you want to take your medication? You won't end up back in crisis. So all of those, that's considered wrestling in this model. Anytime we are trying to convince a person what to do or how to do it, the big shift with MI is this. Can you get the person to make the argument for change? Can you get them to say, hey, if I don't do this, something not happy will happen. I'm going to lose my license, whatever it is. So, and that's a big difference. But wrestling is when we're trying to make them change. And I've used threats, and I don't, if I throw you out of this program, you're going to go to jail, right? And that doesn't seem to make a lot of difference. It didn't help my style. But with wrestling, and then I know what wandering is like, because I spent years working in the field, and when people said, what's your name? Peggy. Peggy used to ask me, well, what do you do? How do you work with people? I'm like, well, what do you mean? It's like, well, what do you do? It's like, I talk to people. I was at a private practice for a while. I talk to people. I got a bartender that talks to me for free. Doesn't charge $165 an hour, right? So just talking to people can be helpful. But what we found out is that's kind of wandering. Maybe one day I'll do this. Well, I didn't like that. Well, tomorrow I'm really not going to do anything because I'm burned out. I'm just going to be there. And then the third day I'm like, I read something. I'm going to try that. And that's kind of wandering. So whatever it is that you choose to do, choose an evidence-based practice would be my challenge to you. And you may be in a program here that actually does that you're in a very kind of thing. But you really just don't want to wander. It's really not fair to the people we work with when we have research that says certain things work better than others. MI is more like dancing. I am a bad dancer. I'm not a recovering person, so I will say that. And if I dance, it's usually late at night and involves alcohol. But several people have tried to teach me to dance. And I wanted to learn. It wasn't, I didn't want to learn. And I'm that uncoordinated. But whatever dancing is, it just doesn't help me. Does anybody in here do what you would consider like formal dancing? What do you do?
I used to do ballroom.
Okay, ballroom dancing is a perfect example. I would know if I saw it, but that's all I would know about it, right? So when you dance, do you typically dance with someone else?
Yes.
Who is that?
Usually the instructor.
Okay, so who leads?
The instructor, or the male.
Okay. If I'm watching her dance, and they're doing a really good job, not me, they're dancing well, could I tell who's leading and who's following? I couldn't. You know, right? But as a casual observer, I'm simply seeing two people dance, and it looks good. I'm like, wow, they dance well. But I'm not thinking she's following, he's leading, or vice versa. MI is kind of like that to a casual observer. Is they just see a conversation. They see a dance. It's not a wrestling. It's not a wandering. They just see people talking. But MI is really the most strategic model that I've ever been exposed to or worked with, and I've done some of those. Hi, how are you? So it's a little bit more like, it's more like dancing than wrestling or wandering. Were any of you at my previous training, which I think was 4 or 5 years ago? So you may remember the riddle. So if you know the answer to this riddle, make the rest of our colleagues here suffer for a few minutes. A man goes home and he sees a man with a mask, but he knows he's safe. Who's the man with the mask? A man goes home and sees a man with a mask, but he knows he's safe. Who's the man with the mask? Anybody want to guess?
Man himself?
No, but that's number one answer. If we were playing Family Feud, you'd get lots of points. It's not Batman. It's not a fireman. It's not his father. That always comes up once in a while for some odd reason. Does anybody know the answer to the riddle? It's the umpire at a baseball game. A man goes home plate, sees a man with a mask, the umpire, and he knows he's safe. It's a little riddle. It's a paradigm shift. It takes words that we commonly have certain images of, and it changes the way we think of those words. In motivational interviewing, these 3 words are key, and they really mean different things than we normally think about. When I tell people I train on motivational interviewing, they think we're in here going, we can do it, we can do it. We're all children of the universe and everything, and I'm not saying that's bad, I don't do that, but I know people that have that, and I think it seems to help them. It's a behavioral change model. Bill Miller, the creator, and Stephen Rolnick eventually became a co-author with him on much of it, are behaviorists. I mean, and when I say behaviors, they're not rats in mazes. It's like, how can we get people to, how can you get a parent to change their parenting behavior? How can you get an alcoholic to change his behavior or her behavior in a way that doesn't trigger use once they leave treatment? How do you get a child to stop doing certain behaviors because they were traumatized? What is it that so you're trying to not get that child to isolate, maybe harm animals. So if you think about it, I'm not really a behaviorist, but when it comes down to it, it's really about changing our behavior. So that's what motivation in this model is. What is the likelihood or the probability that a person will enter into? Does anybody work in intake or outreach? That's the enter into, right? They're going to come here to do something. Continue with, they will stay and do what they're supposed to do for whatever period of time, one visit or live here for 10 years, whatever it is that they're supposed to do. And the adhere to later is when we're out of people's lives, will they continue to do the kinds of things that we try to assist them in changing? So that's what motivation. Will they come in? Will they stay? And when we're no longer with them, will they continue to work on the behaviors, the things that we thought were helpful to them while they were here? Influences is got just a different meaning in this word. It's what's going on in a person's life. One of the biggest influences in this model deals with ambivalence. Right? Feeling two ways about something. Now, back when I started in the substance abuse field, if a person came in and said, well, maybe I drink too much, but I'm probably not going to quit. I like drinking. It's really not that bad for me. I mean, back 30 years ago in the therapeutic community, that person would have been in trouble, right? I mean, they would be screamed at and yelled at, or you're in denial, and all of these kinds of things that we talk to people. But in the influences like ambivalence and the external forces, we acknowledge, listen, your analysis works. Works really pretty well. There's been studies where they take half the people and they say, everybody gets treatment for a short period of time. I think it was 14 days. And then half the people are said, good luck to you. You can go to AA or NA. In fact, we even have an aftercare meeting if you'd like to come here. But that's the end of your treatment, 14 days. And what we're going to do, though, is we're going to pay you for every observed negative urinalysis. So every clean urine you drop, we're going to give you $75. And you can do 3 every 10 days. This group continues in treatment for 6 months, residential. That was so here is the experiment group. The normal thing the village did at that time, as years ago, was that 6 months. This group did better than that group. Even in the follow-ups, they did better. So, I mean, it's like we got to watch because those are influences, right? And again, ambivalence is one of the powerful ones. It's like, I don't know if I want to do this. And in MI, we like ambivalence because it helps deal with some things. The other term is self-efficacy. Can people do something? So, a little more exploration on my friend's bicycle. She hasn't ridden a bicycle. I think she was 51, 52. She hadn't ridden a bicycle since she was a child. She lived off of Delray off of Atlantic Boulevard on the East Coast. Anybody familiar with that area? Really highly populated, not just with cars, with people and bikes and lots of things. So her challenge is, where does she learn to ride the bike? Now, if she lived on a cul-de-sac or, in some other kind of area, she could try it. So self-efficacy is, I don't think I can do that thing. And one of the things we work with in motivational interviewing is building a person's self-efficacy, building some sense of, I could do that. And I remember multiple times people coming to this understanding that, for example, the example would be alcoholism. I'm an alcoholic. Are you telling me I can never drink again? I mean, the rest of my life, I've been drinking for 42 years. Are you telling me I can never drink again? In our response, and I am a supporter of AA and NA, but our typical response is, I don't know. can you stay sober today? And then when you wake up tomorrow, can you do one day at a time? And don't worry about that right now, you know. But right now, it's probably a good idea for you to abstain from alcohol. But can you do it? Can you get through today without drinking? I can do that. And that's what self-efficacy is about, is building the person's, if you say to them, you can never drink again, you have a disease, and one's too many, 1,000's not enough, and they're like, and I've just seen the look on their face when they go through that. But with schizophrenics, I'll be schizophrenic my entire life. Well, if you take the medication and get some help and some support, you probably will function pretty well. If you decide to do whatever you want to do, we don't know what that'll look like. But, there's certain times we tell people, but if we can build their self-efficacy, if we can build the sense of, I can do that, that's something I can do. Well, you just have to be a better parent. Well, I don't know if I can do that. Well, you have to be. Well, how do I do that? Well, I don't know, you just be a better parent. I know we don't say that, but sometimes that's how our clients hear us. And it's like, I can't do that. You haven't been around my kids. My kids would drive you crazy. I can't be a better parent. So then we teach them some things. We work with them, we support them, and then we build some self-efficacy, which is, would you be willing to try that thing, one time next week with your kids? Just once. All right, I think I could do that. And that actually, it's the self-efficacy that really feeds the motivation. If they can do it, then they're more likely to enter into it and those other words that are there with it. I normally have just plain white slides. And before I left home the other day, I thought, I'll make these pretty. And this format puts that line there. So that line is not there because I put it there, it's just because I failed to look at them closely. The first slide looked good too, right? I just didn't go, because you just click a button and they all go to that style. So I just want to let you know that line there has no meaning whatsoever. Why do people not change? They don't think they can do it. They really no concern for the status quo. I work with adolescents a lot of my life, and they're bulletproof, right? So what did I read the other day? This should disturb us. That, can I pick up your phone? Yes. That adolescents have bulletproof cases on their phones and are having unprotected sex. Oh. Think about the value of that, right? Man, I don't want to lose my phone. I don't want it to break or whatever, but I will have unprotected sex. But so they're okay with things. Things aren't bad. They can handle this. I can deal with this. It's under my control. It's not so bad. It's a lot of blame and a lot of shame. My daughter-in-law, I spent the night with her and my son last night in Cape Coral. She's a school teacher. She had another teacher come to her and say that she's been battling depression really bad over the summer. And she really wanted to call Gina and talk to her on the phone because they were friends at school, but she was so embarrassed by it. And that's stigma, and there's a lot of blame. It's not my fault. Why should I change? Role of fear. So sometime this afternoon, I will be heading back to Fort Lauderdale. And between here and, I don't know what it's like, Marco Island, Naples, that area, it's not easy to go real fast. But then I get on Alligator Alley. Right. So how fast do you go? When it's a nice, bright, sunny day, there's no rain, there's miles of open highway, there's no police around, how fast do you go?
Probably 5 miles over the speed.
5, okay, I do 10 to 12. I know that some of you are like amateurs. I mean, I've talked to people like 90 to 100, but I tend to go 80 to 82, thinking if I do get a ticket, it's not going to be that expensive, and I rationalize these things. Can I tell you what, this is the same thing our clients do. I can take a risk. Well, no, you can't. Oh, sure I can. I can go 82. But they're going 82 in a behavior that we're trying to modify or change with them. So let's say you're driving a little faster than your norm. And up ahead you see a Florida Highway Patrol car parked clearly in a way that is measuring people's speed. What do?
I try not to step on the brake.
Not to be.
To myself.
Do
But
our
I'll
clients
take
do
my-
that?
I'll take my.
I don't want you to see what I did.
Later.
Yeah, and then you go the speed limit. But as you pass the car, what do you start looking in? The rear view mirror, right? So you go a quarter mile and they're still parked on the side of the road and the lights haven't come on. And you go a half mile, now you're a mile or two down the road and you're not even sure if you can see the car anymore. What do you do to your speed?
Well, before I pass them, I make sure there's even somebody sitting in the car, because our police stations, it's cars with no one in them around.
But we tend to go right back up to the speed we were going, am I right? Yeah, and but I want to say that's the role of fear in behavioral change. It can get people's attention, but if all we have is fear, they're likely to as soon as we're out of their rear view mirror, they're more likely to go back to what it is that they were doing. If fear changed behavior, HIV would have been eradicated in the early 90s because everyone died. Everyone. And some of you were working in the field at this time. I had the misfortune being in a position where it was often I and the director of nursing to tell the person, because it was a death sentence. There was no treatment. It wasn't 1 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 99 out of 100. What made it so frightening was every single person on record died back then. People still had unprotected sex. So fear can get people's attention. So sometimes I'll do that. I'll say something to get their attention, but if that's all I have to offer them, chances are when I'm gone in their rear view mirror, they return to their behavior. But there's reasons people don't change. Some of it is ambivalence, and that word we talked about earlier. If you are here, and what you really want to be is over here, you want to change. This is what I want to tell you. Most of the people you work with, it's not that they don't want to be here, it's they don't want to go through this stuff. I'm smoking cigarettes. 87% of people currently smoking cigarettes want to quit. Think about that. But they just don't want to gain 15 pounds. They don't want to chew their nails off. They don't want to chew their partner's head off. They don't want to stay up at night and be jittery. What they want to be is over here, not smoking cigarettes and not wanting to. No urges, no cravings. I'm done. I'm over here. There are a handful of people in the world that accomplish that, by the way. They go from here to here. Some of you have thought about going back to school, right? And you're over here and you're thinking, I would like another degree, or maybe I'd like to get licensed or certified. What you want to be is over here. Will someone just hand me a diploma? I don't want to go to classes. I don't want to study. I don't want to write papers. And I haven't even paid off my other student loan yet. But I just want to be here. So part of what we help motivate people to do in this model is, how do they go from there to there? Because, I really have met very few parents, and I've worked with Duresky, very few parents who are really evil. They're out there, and some of you have had to work with them. But most parents don't want to lose their children. Most parents want their kids to do well. They may say a bunch of stuff that makes you think they don't. But in people's hearts, the average alcoholic, by the time they come to us, I'm not saying, oh, I got a DUI, I don't really drink that much. Probably the reason I got a DUI is I never drink and drive, right? But it's like people just want the thing. How do we get them to go through the process as part of the challenge? Because there's not a lot of magic wands around. The most spontaneous remission of cigarette smoking, does anyone know what population it occurs? People literally stop smoking. And it's sometimes for as long as 9 months. That's a clue to what it is. Pregnant women. I talked to a woman who said, I had 3 children. As soon as I found out I was pregnant, I stopped right then and there. As soon as, in fact, I think she even said, as soon as I thought I was pregnant before the doctor confirmed it. But every time she went to the hospital, and this was some years ago, what did she pack in her bag? Cigarettes. So, literally, as soon as she walked out of the hospital door, she was going to light. She lit up a cigarette and returned to that behavior. So it's this middle stuff. So there's very few people that spontaneously change. And the truth is, if they can do that, we normally don't work with them, right? This is the person who changes their behavior, and we don't know a lot about that. There are two people at Nova Southeastern University, Mark and Linda Sobel, that have spent their life. This is what they're known for, and they're near retirement. It's like 30, 40 years. They study self-quitters. They study those people who, some of them are the reasons we have jobs. They study the people who made the change and to learn about it, that maybe they could transfer those skills to people who have a greater challenge in making changes. There's resistance. People are resistant sometimes to the process. I don't want to do that thing. I don't want to come to the groups. I don't want to live there. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want you visiting in my home. It's the process. It's the thing. So we'll talk about a little bit about how to lower that. Then there's sometimes it's about you. They have resistance to you. We don't talk a lot about transference anymore, but when I got my education in the early 80s, transference was still, it's like, how does that person feel about you as a counselor, therapist, or worker, whatever it is that your title is? And it may usually have nothing to do with you. That was the idea of transference. It wasn't you. You reminded them of their mother, of their father, of a principal, or something that happened, or the way you look, or the way you talk, and it's got nothing to do with who you actually are. Now, we also know we can create resistance in people by what we do. So people are resistant to change, sometimes because they just don't want the thing, sometimes it's they don't like us. And I remember we did a Department of Corrections 6-month non-secure program I worked at. And there was a man, I want to say he was probably in his middle 40s, and his counselor was fairly new out of school. I want to say she was in her middle 20s. And the two of them clashed like this. And she was like, you need to put somebody else. And he was like, I need a new counselor. And I said to her, you probably, because this was supervision, it wasn't just a brief thing. So I bet you remind him of his mother. She said, he's 30 years older than I am. I said, ask him what time of his life he started having real problems with his mom. His mom was 25. So remember that. So sometimes people have problems with us about things, and it's not what we did. Couple things. People can make amazing changes. I am shocked at I'm nearing 36 years of doing this, but I'm always amazed, and I stand in awe of what people can get through, of what has happened to some people and what they've gone through and how they can pull that out. And there's no doubt that some of you in the room right now have a story to tell, many of you, of how did you get to be in this room instead of in a place that wasn't helping people or even helping yourself. So people have an amazing ability to make changes, and two, we play a bigger role in that than we sometimes think. What I don't like is this statement: people only change when they're ready to change. Well, if we're not a part of that process, if we're not a part of helping them make a change, what good are we? It's like, sit in your office, and when the ready people show up, I'll send them to you. Because we don't want the people in the therapeutic communities spit those people out like seeds, right, from a watermelon. We ever eaten watermelon over here? They just... so we play a big role in that, bigger than most of us think we do. And it's about our relationship. Now, this really started with Carl Rogers back in the 50s, and he became into prominence in the 60s, but it's about our relationship with the person. So I want to say this right off the bat. Some of you, I assume, by your age have been doing this a while. Sir, what's your name? Dave? All right. How long have you been doing this kind of work? Not here naming, but Yeah. You've seen clients, patients crash and burn, right? You've seen staff do it.
Absolutely.
And that's the terrifying part of this, is like the numbers of people. So when I talk about the relationship, we're talking about an ethical relationship with people. And I mean, it just has frightened me over the years how many times I've seen really poor, and you don't stay in this field very long if you're not ethical about what you do. So it's about this relationship, but it's not in the sense of a relationship that you might have with your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, or whatever it is that you have. But it's establishing some rapport with the person, and it can do these two things. These are the keys. It can help them make changes, and you can build their self-efficacy to do that. If you wanted one slide today to walk out of here and say, what is our role in change, and how does motivational interviewing work with this, is we can, through a relationship, we can motivate people. And again, it's not that, I can do it, I can do it. I've had programs where we have most improved client of the week. And you know what it seemed to be? A free certificate to go out and screw up, because it seemed like as soon as because it was superficial. So self-efficacy has to really be based in something. It's not just, you're great, you can do it. That doesn't always seem to help people. But it's these things. We can help motivate people to change through the relationship, and through the relationship we can build self-efficacy. So there's two sets of skills that MI has, and we're going to go through these briefly, but I told Jennifer, and who I send this to, this has been my life for the last 18 years, is motivational interviewing. It's what I do for a living, but it also really has influenced me with my children, my friends, my coworkers, people that I have an opportunity to work with. So these skills are about building relationships, open-ended questions. Tell me more about that. And good quality open-ended questions are guiding the person to what it is that you want to talk about. It's not like, well, tell me about your weekend, and tell me how work's going, and how are things with your family, and what are you going to do? Those are questions, but they're really not strategic. You want to look like you're dancing, but you want to ask questions that help guide the person to the topic, to talk about what it is that you want. Affirmations, these have to be based, with their MI, on something the person has said or done. And change effort, even if it's verbal. So if the person has tried to do something, I sat in to supervise an aftercare group, and this is like 25 years ago, and a man stood up and he goes, tomorrow I have 1 year clean from crack cocaine. And he said, I lost everything, and he told his story. And then near the end of it, he said, I have a couple of beers on the weekend. Doesn't seem to really bother me, but I'm thinking I'm going to spend this year working on that. The counselor said, you're still using. Right? Instead of affirming him for overcoming one of the hardest addictions that are out there, he was like, you're still using, which is, and you could affirm the person and say, wow, man, you've changed your life. You've done something that very few people in our community are able to do. You've not only clean, you've stayed clean. And you realize that alcohol may be a problem for you, and this year that's going to be something you're going to look at. That's the affirmation. But this isn't, you're the best mom. You're going to do so well. Those are superficial. They're disingenuous. People recognize that. It's like I've had supervisors that they're like, hey, you're doing a great job. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And boom, they're gone. Instead of saying, listen, I want to let you know, I've noticed your paperwork is caught up. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. It's not just caught up, it's really well done. I noticed you talking to one of the clients on the sidewalk the other day on the way home. You gave extra time. You could have just said, I'm done, I'll talk to you tomorrow. But you stopped and talked to that person. I want you to know how much I really appreciate your dedication to your work and to the people that you have the opportunity to work with. Thank you. That means something. And that's what it should be in MI, not this, oh, you're going to do great, you're wonderful, you're the best this, you're the wonderful, that's superficial, and it's just people shed it very, very quickly. Reflections are the hardest thing that I've learned to do in this model, to do good reflections. Simple reflections, a person says something and you simply repeat it, that's got value, you got the verb, but the highest quality reflections have some empathy, and they tend to go a little bit further. I observed a session not long ago with a man who had been arrested for domestic violence in his home. He had returned to his home, which kind of surprised me because usually that doesn't happen. And he's talking to the counselor. And really the problem was, if you've ever seen the power and control wheel, it's very descriptive. He was isolating his wife and emotionally abusing her, sometimes physically abusing her. She wanted to go to school to be a nurse. You're not doing that. And finally, so after like just a fairly brief 10 or 12 minutes, the counselor picked up on this. And the guy said, well, what if she goes to school and flunks out? And then says, but what if she goes to school and decides she doesn't want a family anymore? And really good reflections sometimes take a best guess. The counselor said, what would really be painful for you if she decided to go back to school and didn't want you anymore. And that was the whole key to it. That was a reflection. He's what would really be painful, wasn't a question, is what would that look like? So reflections can be really powerful, and the more in depth they are, and not lengthy, right? It doesn't mean, oh, it was like 27 sentence reflections because he said, oh crap, you know, and it's just, they tend to be very well pointed, they tend to deal with the behavior. Summaries are either really good ways to transition inside of a session or transition the end of a session. All right, let's talk about what we said today. But the quality of the summary is this. You let the person know you listened to them and heard them. So the first thing we talked about was that your stepdad has really been on your back, and how that has really made you angry, and how your mother seems to side with him and not with you. And then we talked after that a little bit about what's been going on with you at school. You know, you used to go to school every day and kind of enjoy it, and for the last year, it's not really been going well. You skip school a lot. Even when you're there, you're getting high. And the third thing we talked about is your friends have really changed. And kind of what we ended with was talking a little bit about what you thought the role of smoking weed was in relationship to all those things, and you're not really sure now. Maybe that's where we can pick up next week. So that's what a summary does. It's not what you said, you're summarizing what the person has said in a meaningful way that they say, wow, you got it, that's it. And then you can either transition to a new topic or end the session that way. Differentially responding. The model is moving away a little bit from stages of change, but they're really quickly, there are people that are pre-contemplators. I don't have a problem. It's not me. It's my stepdad. It's the cop who arrested me. I don't drink more than my friends. Everybody drinks a bottle of vodka every night that I know. You know, so pre-contemplators are people that not only have no reason, why would they change? They don't see the problem, right? Whether it's a parent or a kid or a child, they just don't even see the problem. Contemplators are people that begin to say, I think it might be, there's times I think about it, but I'm not going to change, right? But they're thinking about it at least. They acknowledge that their parenting, their behavior, substance abuse, whatever it is that you're working with, even depression. And I mean, I've worked with people that are severely depressed that have just as much denial as any substance abuser you can find. I'm not depressed. I just don't like to go out. I don't like people. And they're okay with it, but they don't link it to a depressive episode. So differentially responding is how do we respond to people on issues that they're not even sure they have a problem with. And supports. We're rating a bunch of stuff now. Has anybody ever worked with the model wraparound, not just as intensive case management, but as an evidence-based practice? What have you done? You've done everything. You even knew what a therapeutic community was.
Oh, no, not me.
Oh, you haven't?
No.
Oh, all right. But it's a different way of working with people. And if I could quickly explain it, I would say this. Think of the most difficult thing you've ever gone through in your life, the thing that just brought you to your knees. You're not going to have to share this, but I'm going to ask you to raise your hands at some things because I want you to realize the role that this plays and how MI really supports this. So again, think about the thing that just was horrible for you, horrific, and hopefully you're still not going through it. But I'm going to ask you to raise your hand in response to 4 questions, and you can raise your hand to every single question that applies to your situation. So in thinking about that difficult thing, how many of you got through it with the help and the support of family? Raise your hand. Kind of look around a little bit while we're doing this. Okay, thank you. And again, you can respond multiple times. How many of you got through that very difficult thing with the help and the support of friends, people in your life? How many of you got through that thing with the help and the support of your faith, your spiritual life? How many of you got through that very difficult thing with the help and the support of a professional in our field and with paid services? Some people do. We're valuable. I'm not trying to say, but we always leave out family, faith, and friends, right? It's like it's about us. And sometimes we do. So what we want to do in the relationship is try to find healthy people in their lives that support them as well. These are the behaviors. So you develop the relationship because without an engagement and some kind of connection with the person, your ability to influence their behavior goes way down. I mean, way down. If you don't have that relationship, and again, an ethical, professional relationship, your ability to be a part of that change process is diminished significantly. So if you can get there, then we have these opportunities to do that. Darn Cat is up here to, and this is about change talk. If we're not talking about change, it's called sustained talk. We're talking about what you always do. And I've heard people say to me, I mean, I had, when I was in a private practice, I had a person come to me and say, I was in therapy for 4.5 years for my sexual abuse as a child. And I just thought that my therapist just didn't want to let me move on. Now, I don't think that's a one-session kind of thing. That's not brief therapy. Trauma tends to be a very difficult, and it can be very lengthy. But this was somebody who really did want to move on, and the therapist was kind of keeping her there by sustained talk. Let's keep talking about the problem. She was in her 40s. This had happened to her as a child. Horrific, horrible, needs to be talked about, needs to be dealt with. But if it's 4.5 years later and your therapist is still making you talk, sustained talk, there's probably something that's not good going on. So we want to emphasize change talk. And the darn cat is this. Anything we talk, does the person have a desire to make a change? I want to keep my kids. I really do. Do they have the ability to make a change? I like to do outpatient, but I would need to detox first. Do they have reasons to make a change? If I do this, maybe I won't die. If I do this, maybe my health will be better. If I do this, maybe the judge will look more kindly upon my case. So those were reasons. Needs are, I need to do this or I'm going to lose my license. I need to do this or I'm going to get, whatever. So the desires, ability, reasons, needs are climbing the mountain. But it's change talk, right? And once we get to a certain point, we want to move to the cat, which is commitment. Try and evoking these things. We're not saying you need to do this, but can we get the person to do it? Can they make a commitment? Can they start activation? Well, I haven't run yet, but I'm going to buy a new pair of shoes so I can run. Activation. I realize that I get so burned out with my kids sometimes that I now have 2 people in my life that said I can call them and they'll give me an hour respite when I'm losing it with my children. Activation. I found out where an NA meeting was really near my house, and it's a 6 a.m. meeting. And then the T is taking steps. I went to the meeting. I ran last night. I tried a different way of working with my children. I talked to my stepfather without yelling at him. So talking about change is a really key thing here. Evoking is this. All right, what's your first name?
CJ.
T?
C.
CJ.
Cat.
Yeah. So I'm just going to make a stuff up for you, all right? Let's make it, keep your own demographic, your own age. So let's say you're an alcoholic. You've had 3 or 4 treatment attempts. Some of them had some success, but you've eventually realized and you're now so on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it for you to begin to make some changes in your drinking? Now that is a purposeful statement that's not going to create a relationship problem. You're going to quit or you're going to die. Death, jails, and institutions, buddy. You got it? That creates resistance. So I'm going to say the words are important, and not are you going to stop today. On a 1 to 10, how important is it for you to begin to make some changes in your drinking? If 1 is, Dave, it's not important at all, 10 is really important to me. What number would you give yourself?
2.
Why a 2 and not a 1?
Well, because somewhere I think about it. I tried before, and I know it's important.
This is the evoking. And when you evoke, you will hear things instead of me telling him. When you evoke things, you hear stuff that you might not even knew existed in the person. Because if I'm lecturing him and telling him what he needs to do, 90 meetings, 90 days, get a sponsor, works and steps. You know, that kind of thing. And that's a good formula, by the way. But not for a pre-contemplator or contemplator, someone who's just barely emerging out of this. But he now is going to tell me, and then I could say, how confident are you that you can, again, begin to make those changes? 1 is, I have no confidence. And 10 is, I know I can make those changes. What number would you give to that?
Probably a 3.
3.
Well, I failed before.
But you're still willing to keep trying. That's an affirmation. What could we talk about? We got about another half an hour together today. What could we talk about in the next 30 minutes that might move you from a 3, your confidence that you can do this, from a 3 to maybe a 3.5 or a 4? What would make you more confident?
My friends. Talking about my friends.
Yeah, and this is evoking, right? And the key is, from the research, if we can get the person to say it, and we didn't make them say it, they're way more likely to do it. So it's an evoking style. It's getting things from people. We create. If there's no ambivalence, I don't have a problem. I want to create ambivalence. I never thought about it that way. Never really saw it in that light before. Trying to keep an eye on the clock. Resistance. If we see it, it should be a warning flag for you to stop and re-engage people. So whenever you sense resistance, and it might be you're talking to somebody and they look at their watch, they're on Facebook or something, right? We want to identify and develop discrepancies. On one hand, you'd like to make some changes in your drinking, but on the other hand, you're not willing to leave the friends that seem to always take you back to the bar with them. Discrepancies. On one hand this, on the other hand that. Create cognitive dissonance and help motivation. My son, when he was at home, was like, on one hand, John, you really want to go out with your friends tonight, but on the other hand, you just couldn't get your homework done. And they're typically framed in that kind of way. This is how we tell people that they're talking the talk but not walking the walk. Usually that's one way to think about it, without creating resistance. We do strategic reflections like, that's really unusual. I've never heard anyone say that before. What makes you think that way? We use reflection strategically, not to engage the person, but as a part of a strategy. And then we do decisional balancing. So what you get for sitting up front. What population do you work with here? So you be a mom and you're there for whatever reason, you're there, right? And it would be, what are the good things, the pros? This is decisional balancing. What are the good things about your parenting? What is it that you think, I do this well?
Make sure that I take care of my children's needs.
Okay. What else do you do well?
That's what I know how to do. Just got a good parent.
Okay. Are there anything about your parenting style, your skills, that you think, maybe I could do a little bit better, I can improve or change some of those? Anything about your parenting that you thought, maybe this isn't the best for my children?
Maybe. some of the things?
She says maybe I've got at least ambivalence. And that's the value of ambivalence, right? Because if you said, nope, I don't have ambivalence. So we can create it that kind of way. If you work with people without any addiction, including cigarettes, and you've never said to them, what do you like about marijuana? What do you like about weed? What are the good things? We're terrified to do that because we think people will talk for hours. I give you my word, I bet I've asked that question to over 5,000 men, women, kids. And they'll say 3 or 4 things. It helps me chill out. What else does it do? It helps me relax. Yeah, you said that. What else does it do? I can forget about my problems. Yeah, you said that. What else? That's it. I'm telling you, it's my friends do it. Okay. But then you ask them in a very nice, subtle way, and this is decisional balancing, for you, because you want to personalize it, for you, do you ever have any concerns or ever times come up where you think, maybe there's something not so good about smoking weed all the time? Well, my parents and my school and my friends. But if you honor them by asking, what do you like about the behavior? You can then say, are there any not so good things about that behavior? If you want to just take one thing out of this room to play with, well, what do you like about driving drunk? Are there any not good things about it? What do you like about skipping school? Are there any not so good things about it? But just about things that you never thought would be on your resume. 2 years ago, I was awarded the National Breastfeeding Advocate of the Year Award. And this, right, yeah. This goes back to actually in 2002 when someone asked me to research in Broward County, how can we reduce childhood obesity? There's nothing scalable. There's nothing that's working. There's nothing anywhere that's scalable, meaning can we get everyone to do it in our county, or as many people? And then I eventually found out just randomly that breastfeeding helps reduce childhood obesity, and it sustains through childhood and into the teen years, and there's research on it. So I created all these MI magazines and workbooks to try to increase breastfeeding rates of women in Broward County. We reduced childhood obesity rates of WIC children at age 3 by 37%. While the rest of the state, and listen, that also has to do with our WIC department, some incredibly passionate, intelligent, dedicated. I just created the framework for it. But what do you like about it? What are your concerns about breastfeeding? So you can use it for just about everything. For you, a lot of this can be self-taught. There is so much stuff on the internet, you wouldn't believe it. I mean it. There's thousands and thousands. I would challenge you to do this. There's not a behavioral topic that you can give me that we can't Google motivational interviewing and that topic. Parenting, childbirth, breastfeeding, it's all out there. So there's a lot that you can do to self-teach yourself. So let me wrap up by finishing the story So I meet this woman, she has a bicycle, she never rides it. I get to know her a little bit better. You know what she tells me? You know that bicycle? My brother gave it to me 3 months before he died of cancer. I can't get rid of it. It's one of the ways I connect to my brother. And maybe I will ride it, maybe I won't. But the thing is, we judge people sometimes. We jump ahead of things, and we think, oh, you're just lazy, or you don't want to do it, and it's stupid, and then you hear the story, and you think, wow, I'd keep that bike forever. Hence, why she wants to maintain it. Hence, why she doesn't want it to fall over. It was a precious gift from her brother. So remember that story and thinking, I judge people too quickly sometimes, and it's so embarrassing to hear the rest of the story for me to think, oh my God, I was thinking this about them, and this is really what's going on with them. Thank you so much. You have a wonderful day. I appreciate it.